Second. All right, here we go. Welcome to another exciting week in space. I am your host with the most, Jonah Emerson Bell. I'm an astrologer, tarot reader, licensed mental health counselor, and I like to show up every morning at 11-ish Mountain Time to tell you all what's going down with this week in space. Yeah. So, because I'm here, turns out it's Monday again. Man, these things just keep happening. And we'll be talking about some of the stuff that is happening, popping off, going down in the celestial spheres. A little late this morning, but I show up as best I can, given that this is a completely free service that I do for the betterment of myself as well as hopefully for the betterment of the folks that tune in. If you like this, I don't know, like, subscribe, follow, send this to other people who might like it. I like to put it out there just because I think it's important and it's kind of a cool way of staying in tune with the celestial spheres and with the astro weather. And for me, this was sort of how I began to learn astrology, following astrologers that I like, things that I resonated with, and sort of just tuning in every week and hearing what's going on and relating it to what I see happening in the news, relating to what I see happening in my life. And it was a really sort of embodied way for me to begin learning astrology. And now that, I don't know, I kind of think I've got a handle on it a little bit. It feels good for me to be able to share that back with folks, to sort of not only be able to express the ways that I view the transits and astrology and how it's impacted my life and how I see it unfolding in the world around me, but also to be able to sort of share this language with people because it is sort of a language and it takes a while to kind of get into it and to figure out, okay, like, maybe I'm more than just my sun sign and like all these things that are kind of happening constantly in space. Like, how do they resonate with me? How do they kind of impact my life? How do they show up in my world? And, being able to sort of be in that language and moving through that language and picking it up as we go, kind of like a astrology language immersion, things begin to click and things begin to sort of settle in. And we begin to see, oh, this is the feeling of a trine, or this is the feeling of Venus, or this is how Mars shows up in my life. And I think that that can be incredibly helpful. And so I just want to thank folks for coming on this journey with me each and every Monday at 11-ish a.m. Mountain Time. Yeah, today I was like trying to like sort out my lighting a little bit and my background. I like to have a good background for y'all. But the light behind me was a little intense, so we're going like this. Anyway, good morning, Gina Maria. Good morning, everybody. Welcome on in. Sit back, relax. I'm going to take us through the transits that we'll be experiencing this week in space. And before I jump into that, I just want to remind folks that I'm going to be co-facilitating a retreat in Epidavros, Greece, at the autumnal equinox. This will be going on September 20th through 27th in Greece, and I'm co-facilitating it with Sarah Janes, who is an author, mythologist, dream worker, pretty amazing person, and we'll be talking about sacred waters, healing waters, dreaming waters. We'll be going to some sacred sites and sacred springs, talking a lot about the mythology related to these places, as well as be talking about the water signs in astrology and the element of water, how it can be used magically, how we can find it in our lives, talking about psychology and the psychology of water. It's going to be really cool. We're going to have a blast. I hope to see you there. If you are interested, you can go to the website themysteries.org and then go to the retreats page, and it's the Dreaming Waters retreat, and check it out. And yeah, I think that there's one or two spots left. So if you're interested, yeah, just head on down to the website and sign yourself up today. and hopefully I'll get to see you in Greece because it's going to be a blast. I think it's going to be pretty life-changing. At least I hope it's life-changing for me, and I'd like to share that with you all. Other than that, yeah, again, just if you like this, share it with some other folks who might like it, and subscribe, like, blah 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 blah. It's also comes out on the YouTube. You can go to my YouTube page, Camp Wizard Camp. Also comes out as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts at. Under This Week in Space with three exclamation points, not to be confused with This Week in Space with zero exclamation points. And those folks don't really seem very excited about what's going on in space. But here, you know we're excited. So, with that being said, let's jump into the astrology of the week. We're looking at the astrology of July the 28th through August the 3rd of 2025. Kicking it all off, Monday, July the 28th, which happens to be today. We're talking about Venus in Gemini, sextile to Chiron in Aries. This is going down at 27 degrees and 9 arc minutes. So, my friends, a sextile is a supportive aspect, kind of promotes communication, right? It's a harmonious aspect, and harmonious aspects like sextiles and trines are kind of times of ease, right? As opposed to the harder aspects like squares and oppositions, where we're asked to like kind of put in work and move through tension, right? We'll be talking about some squares later on in the program. But with harmonious aspects, we get a chance to kind of integrate what we have been learning from the more challenging times. So in this case, we have Venus, who deals with love and relationships, coming into a supportive or harmonious aspect with Chiron, who is the wise teacher, right? The teacher of heroes, and also is known as the wounded healer. So this seems right on time because I've had numerous people reach out to me asking like what is up with the stars because relationships and folks in relationships seem to be having a really difficult time lately. I've had several people sort of asking me about this. And I think it's very specific to our unique charts, what's coming up and how we are navigating relationship, how we are navigating connection. But like this seems to be on brand lately. And so, as people are dealing with relationship issues and going through breakups, and a lot of challenges in the more Venusian realms of life, I feel like these things have been building for a while, right? But this is also coming off last week when we had a very transformational new moon in Leo opposing Pluto, where we were asked to kind of confront our shadow and deeper truths that we have maybe been afraid to admit to ourselves or other people for a while, right? As well as a tense square between Venus and Mars, which brought up a lot of conflict and between the need for relationship and connection and the desire to take action for oneself. Right. So all of this said, this week kicks off with this supportive aspect between Venus and Chiron, right? And so this provides an opportunity to reflect on some of the things that we may have learned over the past stretch of time, right? What we have learned from relationships and connections, right? What worked, what didn't work, what might need to shift a little bit in ourselves or in the sphere of relationship in order to feel more seen, right? Or to feel open enough to give and receive love in the ways that we truly want to. So, whatever your experience around these Venusian issues of relationship, beauty, connection, right, over the past few weeks, this is an opportunity to learn from these experiences in order to integrate what we have been through, right, through our recent experiences so that we can grow into having more of what feels good for us. Chiron helps us to learn from the past, right? So the experiences that we've gone through in the past can develop and evolve our understanding of ourselves and how we really show up in the world. Chiron was the teacher of heroes, right? Anyone who was anyone in the ancient world sent their kids to Chiron to learn how to really show up, to kind of rise to the occasion, to kind of bring out their heroic qualities, right? And to kind of recognize their power and their unique gifts. So with this sextile between Chiron and Venus, we get an opportunity to learn about Venusian topics of love and pleasure, right? We can learn from our past experiences where we lost touch with our core values or were pulled out of alignment. Venus, I think at its core is a planet of values, what we like and what we don't like, what we are attracted to, what we are repulsed by, right? And these things give us really good information about who we are and what feels right for us. And, oftentimes, especially in the sphere of relationship, right, or the demands of the external world, we can get a lot of information that tells us, oh, like if you lean away from your value system, then you will be accepted, then you will receive love. And this can also be a story that we create for ourselves around, oh, this is how I need to show up, or like, this is how I need to be so that I can be accepted. And as we are pulled out of our alignment, we kind of abandon ourselves. And Chiron, like this self-abandonment creates wounds. Because when we betray ourselves in order to find connection, to maintain stability, to try and cling to resources or collect resources around us, it sort of wounds our core self, right? As we ignore that intuition, as we ignore that sense of self, it creates wounds. And Chiron can help us to learn from these places, right? And we can also learn from the experiences where we betrayed ourselves and we can see, okay, that felt really terrible, right? How can I not do that again? How can I create a different pattern so that I'm not showing up in that way and feeling a sense of, loss or shame or, that I didn't trust my intuition and it like went really sideways really quickly. And we can also learn from the places where things might have clicked and felt right, and this provides us with valuable information on how to do relationship and to be in connection with ourselves and other people. Chiron is also known as the wounded healer, right? And Chiron's core wound is around abandonment. And abandonment tells a story of scarcity, right? It says that there isn't enough love to go around. There isn't enough connection to go around, right? There isn't enough love for me. And this story can cause us to operate from a place of lack or fear and make choices that are based in fear instead of choices that are based in love or desire or what we truly want. Chiron helps us to heal past experiences and old stories. It shows us the tender places and asks us to lean in and rewrite these old narratives around what we believe is possible for us so we can show up more fully for what we actually want. The wise old centaur, Chiron, reminds us that the poison is in the medicine, right? But as long as it's in the right dose, right? And that old wounds can be healed if we have the courage to be present with ourselves in these painful places, in these painful memories. Here, Chiron is helping us to heal the wounds of love, right? These wounds are created through past experiences in relationship or connection or in the bedroom. Chiron tells us that healing begins in ourselves, right? Our past experiences become a filter through which we process the present moment, right? Oh, this happened this one time, and so I'm never going to let that happen again, right? And so I'm closed off to that, even though this person or this situation may be different, right? Oh, this person seems like the same thing, but they're saying something different, right? So I'm going to still lean into that, right, and see how that works. So this sextile helps us to rework these old filters that we are experiencing our present moment through, and to lean into the places that there is fear or pain, right? And this is not leaning out of our alignment to be like, oh, I'm going to just like suffer through it, right? But noticing those pain points, right? Noticing that sense of activation, then being able to like sit with it for a little bit, right? And be like, okay, is this the same? What is different here? How can I adjust this? How can I shift this to feel a little bit more connected to myself, right? Or a little bit more open to connection with other people, right? And this allows us to open more to joy and deeper connection because our Venusian wounds oftentimes occur through connection, right? And it is through connection that these wounds can be healed, but under the right conditions. And this can require tuning into our core values and our desires, as well as our boundaries, which are really important in a relational structure and kind of throughout life, right? Because we need good boundaries to be able to have good relationships with ourselves and with others and getting to communicate what we do and don't want out of connection, finding connections of all kinds where we feel seen and can feel like we can be ourselves without having to twist or contort in order to fit somebody else's idea of who we should be or some unrealistic ideal of who we're supposed to be. Right. So we don't have to abandon ourselves to fit into situations that don't really fit us because we're afraid that there isn't enough love to go around or there isn't enough love for us. Um, or, um, at the heart of this story of scarcity is that we're too much or not enough or ultimately unlovable. And I don't think any of these stories are based in fact, but the mind can like spin these tales and keep us small and in order to try and keep us safe, right? So we may be like, oh, I can't do this because like somebody one time told me I was too much when I did that. So I have to like keep myself small, right? Or like, oh, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. So I have to like overcompensate for that and like really show up in the way that like rom-coms or like other like media tell me I'm supposed to be, right? And over sexualize ourselves or like kind of like be like super flamboyant because we're told this is how you need to be in order to receive love, which may not be in alignment with who we truly are, right? And so this is a chance to begin to write a new story that feels more aligned because in this world, as tragic as it feels these days, there's no shortage of love. And there's this quote from Bennett W. Goodspeed that I really love. I'm gonna lay it on you right now. The difference between a comedy and a tragedy is that in a comedy, the characters figure out reality in time to do something about it. And I think that this Chiron sextile to Venus, and actually throughout this week, I think this quote really resonates, right? Because I think that this is an opportunity to figure out the nature of reality in order to do something about it so that we can live in a comedy where at the end everyone gets married and has a party instead of living in a tragedy where at the end everybody dies, right? To like oversimplify things. And I think that the choice is up to us, right? And ultimately, with this transit, there's some opportunity for sexual healing. Like Chiron, Venus in a supportive aspect is like a great time for sexual healing, right? So, this week, throw on some Marvin Gaye, right? And get yours in a consensual way that leaves you feeling good. So, moving right along to Wednesday, July the 30th. Um, Chiron stations retrograde in Aries at 27 degrees and 9 arc minutes. So this is just a few days after the Venus sextile to Chiron perfects. And then Chiron stations retrograde. Chiron will be retrograde for the rest of the year. They'll station direct on January the 2nd, 2026 at 22 degrees and 35 arc minutes of Aries. And I like that the last aspect that Chiron is making before they station retrograde is this supportive aspect to Venus. I think that bodes well. And I think that the last aspect a planet makes before they go retrograde, as well as the first aspect that they make when they station direct, can give really good information about the retrograde journey and some of the themes or ideas that are coming up over this time. And so I think that with this Venus sextile to Chiron kind of setting them off on their retrograde journey bodes well. It brings a little sweetness. And it's something to kind of remember as Chiron is going retrograde, right? And we are rethinking the wounds and what we have learned from the wounds and the ways that we can heal them, right? And so I think the Venus sextile to Chiron brings in a sense of like, oh, remember connection, remember relationship, remember your value system as you're sort of retreading the past where, wounds have been activated or like what initiated that core wound in the first place, right? And so with Chiron's retrograde in Aries, we are also looking at the wounds of individuality and the wounds of belonging. And I always think about Aries kind of arriving on the scene and needing to claim their space, right? Needing to struggle to fit in or to carve out space for themselves to belong, right? And so themes and wounds connected to struggling and belonging and fitting in may come up as Chiron moves retrograde through the cardinal fire sign of Aries. Aries is also connected to courage and the courage to be oneself, to explore and to claim one's place in the sun and in the world. Right? The sun is exalted in Aries, and so there is a solar aspect and as well as a heroic aspect to the sign. And the sign of Aries is connected with the myth of Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece. And so in the myth, Jason is one of Chiron's students. He's actually his star student, right? And he learns how to be a hero from the wise old centaur who teaches him everything he knows. And so Jason is the rightful heir to the throne, but his uncle has usurped his kingdom, as they tend to do in these myths. One day, Jason shows up to claim his throne, but his uncle says he must first prove himself. And so he must go on this quest to retrieve the golden fleece from a garden that is sacred to Ares, Mars, a long way over the sea. And the uncle is like, yeah, this dude's never going to be able to do this, and I'm sending him off to certain death. But Jason is like, oh, yeah, no problem, bro, I got this. Right. And so the Golden Fleece, right, bestows the divine right of kings. It is a symbol of sovereignty and agency and authority, and it gives whoever possesses it the right to rule. And it's guarded by a serpent who never sleeps. So Jason accepts this challenge and gathers a crew composed of all of the heroes of the ancient world. It's kind of like the Expendables in Greek myth, right? Like Castor and Pollux, Hercules, Orpheus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they set sail on their ship, the Argos, to retrieve the Golden Fleece. And madcap hilarity ensues, which we're not going to go into too much right here. But throughout the journey, right, Jason is constantly confronted with this like imposter syndrome, right? He's just this like young kid who showed up in this town and is like, yeah, I'm supposed to be king, and now he's like commanding a crew of all of his heroes, all of the heroes, all of the greatest sort of legends in Greek mythology. And so Jason's like, yo, how am I supposed to do this? Like Hercules is just asking me like what he should do here. I don't know. I'm just a kid. Right. And so there's all this imposter syndrome, and he feels inadequate, like he, has no right to be the captain of the ship and to tell all of these great figures what to do. And they're all like looking at him to lead them. Right. And so I think that there is this piece of, getting over our imposter syndrome, right? And the wounds of being like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, like I don't belong here. Oh, I'm not capable of showing up in this situation that Aries kind of brings to the surface, right? And so when they finally arrive to the land where the Golden Fleece is, Jason meets the king, and the king sets him to do a bunch of impossible tasks designed to kill him because the king of this place is like, yeah, I'm not giving up that Golden Fleece. Are you kidding me? Like, whoever possesses that has the right to rule, and I'm not just about to hand that over to some upstart who has just showed up in my kingdom asking for it, right? However, the king's daughter, Medea, great and powerful witch, falls in love with Jason and assists him in completing these tests. And again, we see this theme of the hero on his quest needing assistance from other people and really needing to learn how to ask for help. And I think that this is a really key piece of Chiron's retrograde through the cardinal fire sign of Aries. Learning to ask for and receive help is key, right? Because again, Aries has these themes of like individuality, like I'm arriving on the scene, I'm struggling to like fit in, like to claim space for myself, right? And it has this very like individualist component. But, ain't no one has ever done anything on their own in their life. We all need each other. We are social beings. We are in community. We are in connection. This is super important. And we need to ask for help, right? There's this like American rugged individualist sense, which, even if you're not in America, I think that this is maybe like permeated a lot of the Western world, if not the entire world. This idea of like you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? This myth of rugged individualism that tells us that asking for help or needing assistance is a sign of weakness. And I think that's like totally false, right? This myth also says, the like rugged individualist myth says that if we ask for help, we are incapable or incompetent. And I don't think that this is true either, right? In mythology and fairy tales, right? All the time, the hero always needs assistance to complete their quest, either from some like wizened old wizard or like a small forest animal. Something always shows up to assist the hero in completing their quest. And so, as Chiron retrogrades through Aries, we may be asked to reconsider the ways that we cut ourselves off from connection or assistance because of the wounds of individualism, right? Or the belief that no one is willing or capable of helping us in the ways that we need. And oftentimes we don't even know because we don't bother to ask because the story comes up, oh, if I ask for help, then I'm weak, or oh, I'm such a burden on other people, right? So, what are the ways that we can reconsider and update these old narratives to allow us to be more open to assistance and through that more open to connection? Right? And just think for a moment about when somebody asks you for your assistance, right? It always makes me feel really needed and useful when people ask for my help, like I have something of value, right? Something to share, a way that I can show up where my gifts are honored and appreciated. However, right, when I need help, I always think that I'm putting other people out or that I'm asking for too much or people will think I'm a burden, right? And I think this is a core wound also. Oh, you're too much, right? Oh, you're such a burden. Oh, you always need something. You're not capable and like I'm always needing to help you, right? These are old stories that run through my mind, right? And so that has cut me off from asking for help a lot of the times. But when I don't ask for help, when I don't ask for assistance, when I try and just do it on my own, what I'm actually doing is denying other people the ability to shine their light or to feel like they have something to offer or share, right? When I cut myself off from asking or receiving help. And also, one of the things that I have found is no one can do anything for you if you don't ask for it because people are not mind readers, right? People are not capable of being like, oh, I'm tuning into what you need, right? At a deep level, and let me just drop what I'm doing and show up. It requires us having the courage to ask for help, right? To say, hey, I need something in this situation, or, I'm feeling blah, 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 blah. Can you show up for me in this way? And again, I think these are some of the old wounds or themes that we get to re-examine as Chiron moves backwards through the sign of Aries for the rest of 2025. And so, one other piece that I want to touch on in this myth is when Jason reaches the golden fleece. It is hanging in this tree in this garden that is sacred to Ares, Mars, right, the ruler of Aries, right? And it is guarded by the serpent that never sleeps, who is coiled around this tree and protects the golden fleece, right, which is the symbol of authority and kingship. And Medea, the great and powerful witch who has fallen in love with Jason, gives Jason a potion that puts the serpent to sleep so he can retrieve the golden fleece. and they get out of there and they escape. Right? And the story goes on and blah, 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 blah. But I think a lot about the serpent who never sleeps, right? And I think about this as a symbol of trauma, right? This hypervigilant serpent coiled around the central trunk of our system, right? Our central nervous system, our vagus nerve, right? And protects that sense of agency and autonomy, right? Never sleeping, right? Hyper vigilant, always on the lookout for what can cause danger, what can cause harm, right? Um, you know, this sort of trauma serpent never sleeps and is always on guard and is always like tracking for danger and prevents anyone from getting close or causing us harm. But it also prevents us from accessing that sense of belonging or sovereignty, right? It just like keeps it in here because ain't no one going to get close to that, right? And in order to access these qualities, we need to sort of calm the sense of hypervigilance, right, that the serpent is wired for and lull it into a state of relaxation so we can access that place that allows us to feel like we have actual agency and can come into our power as the rightful heir to our throne, whatever that means for us, you know. Because we don't actually have agency if we're always being hijacked by this trauma serpent who's like, no, you can't get close. Oh no, who just moved over there, right? The the trauma response never sleeps and just like sort of coils around the central nervous system, right? Constantly activating it at like any noise or sudden movement, right? And it seeks to protect us, but actually, it really is holding us away from deeper connection. And so, we might want to reconsider the ways that we are able to approach these protective parts of ourselves and the ways in which we can calm them or allow them to rest so we can come into connection, so we can ask for help, so that we can address some of these core wounds that tell us that it's unsafe, right? That people are unsafe, that like we're not okay in this situation. And this may also be a reworking of what it means to be heroic, right? And the core wounds that either push us into the quest, right? Oh, I've got to prove myself, or prevent us from stepping into our power. And we need to remember that asking for help on our quest towards wholeness and sovereignty is really, really important, right? And that trauma serpent is like, nah, bro, like don't, don't, they're gonna fuck you over. They're gonna betray you, right? And learning the ways that we can sort of calm that through Medea's witchcraft, through being able to hold and support ourselves, right? Through allowing other people to hold and support us, right? Because no one, and I mean no one, has ever been able to complete a quest like this on their own. That's just not how it works. That's not how it's written in the myth. And, these stories were written a long time ago, but also these are very human stories that we tend to live out in our own ways through our own lives, right? And this is the beauty of the archetype or the blueprint, right? That these blueprints are written for us and we can learn from them. And we're also doomed to repeat them in some ways, and that's all right because we learn from our own experience and be like, oh, that's how it went down, right? And we really, in my opinion, require the assistance of others, right? For us to be able to fully show up as ourselves. We may need to really examine the old stories that we tell ourselves that say we can't ask for help or we don't deserve help or that no one will be there for us, right? And so as Chiron moves retrograde through Aries, the sign of, the hero, right, who wants to explore, do it on their own. This is a great time to begin to unravel these old narratives and to allow the assistance that we need so that we can become more of who we truly are and show up in more and more heroic ways, not as a rugged individualist, but as somebody who is in connection with this web of life. And so let me just check the comments real quick. Ooh, and Kendra Deluxe saying this adds some wild depth to the serpent shedding its skin phenomena. Yeah, and serpent in the skin shedding, I think, is a symbol of rebirth, right? And regeneration. And so we may go through periods of our life where it's like, I have to do it on my own and no one's got me, right? And then what is it like to take that off and to be reborn into another sense of like being or a way that we can show up in the world, you know? And I think one of the things that I've learned from Buddhism is we can always begin again, right? In your meditation, your mind wanders, you're over there, you're thinking about your taxes or bills or blah, blah, blah. And then you just bring it back, right? And it's like, okay, I can begin again. And I think that we can do this in our day. I think that we can do this in our life, you know, and this is not like shifting personalities and personas constantly, right? But coming back to our center and being like, okay, cool, I'm going to begin again. Right. This is an opportunity to begin again now that I'm coming back to this like central core of alignment. Right. And Gina Maria is saying sometimes it's our own saboteur that keeps us from being truly who we are and stepping into our power. That's so right, you know. And I think that saboteur is also like a protective part that's like, yo, like this is dangerous. And I think that has a lot of value to keep us safe, but it also being able to keep that in right relationship, right? And even questioning that and being like, okay, serpent, I see you there, right? And I know that like you don't want to get hurt and you don't want us to be in danger, but what is actually happening here, right? Okay, like I just checked the scene, we're good, we're safe. Can we calm this down a little bit? Can we lull this to sleep? You know, can we put on some soft music? Can we come into a state of comfort in our body and to allow that serpent to sort of chill out a little bit so that we can grab this golden fleece and be like, okay, cool, I belong, right? I have a right to be here. I can step into my agency and power and not be run by an old trauma narrative that tells me nothing's safe and no one's here for me and everyone's going to betray me, because that's a really hard way to live. And I don't think that's actually having agency. That's being living out a story that is told from the past about like it was unsafe then and applying that to the future and being like, okay, so it's unsafe now. And as we can like really get a little perspective on that and come into a felt sense of safety, it gives us a much wider breadth of agency to make choices that are not being run by an old trauma narrative that we're filtering the present experience through, but being able to truly show up for this is what's actually happening now, and I have the agency to be able to deal with these situations as they arise. Woo, cool. All right. Uh, yeah, and Wes Eddy saying with Saturn, Neptune, and Chiron in Aries, it feels like a bad trip for the ego and but maybe a very necessary one. And I totally agree with that. I think that our sort of like sense of self and individuality and ego identities are going through a real reconfiguration. And I think that this, like Wes Eddy saying, like I think that this is really valuable because I think that these like our ego identities are locked in a pretty ancient tale of like rugged individualism that I don't think is actually helpful or serving anyone. I think it kind of perpetuates a capitalist idea of I've got to get mine and I'm willing to step on anyone who I can to get there because there's not enough. And if my neighbor has something, then I might not have enough of it. And I think that's really erroneous. I think it's really false and has done a lot of harm to us as individuals and to the world that we're living in. And I think that this reconfiguration of the ego and individual identity is incredibly helpful, but it's painful because it requires us to let go of old ego constructs and old ideas that we've been living with for a really long time. And it's, you know, I can only really speak about America because this is where I live and I have a much better sense of it than any place else in the world. But I think that this is, you know, the ethos of America is like there's not enough to go around. And if you are not on your game all the time, then you're going to be unhoused and, you know, look around you at all of these people who are suffering and you can't help them because there's not enough. And if you slip up, you're going to be one of them. And I think that's a terrible story. I think that's a terrible story that cuts us off from connection, cuts us off from ourselves, cuts us off from community. And I think that these things are really needing to be revamped. And I think that we're in the slow and painful process of doing this both individually and collectively. And my only hope is that as we go through this process and are shedding these old narratives, these old toxic myths, that we are able to come into better connection with ourselves, with each other, and to invent better myths, better stories that bring us more into connection and less in our kind of isolated bubble. And we're going to be talking about this a little later in the program because rounding out the week, Venus is coming into square the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So Venus moving from the supportive aspect to Chiron to kick us off this week. And coming into this like sense of, okay, like how do I heal old wounds through coming into connection, right? How do I examine and acknowledge my old wounds of relationship or love or connection? How do I sort of rework those? And then coming into this square with Neptune and Saturn, dealing with the sort of fantasy and reality and the issues that we come up against when our relationships, right, and our sense of love and connection and values are confronted with like, this is the cold reality and this is the ideal that I have, right? And how do we navigate that? But we'll get to that in a minute. Because first, and also occurring on Wednesday, July 30th, Venus enters the cardinal water sign of Cancer, right? And so Venus in Cancer is looking for consistency and connection, right? Here, Venus has a long memory and is looking to forge lasting bonds. And part of this is about creating emotional safety through shared history and shared bonds. And safety allows for vulnerability, which makes intimacy possible. And Venus loves intimacy. And a recipe that I've heard from about intimacy, right? Or the recipe for intimacy is trust plus vulnerability equals intimacy, right? So like being able to create situations where there is enough trust that we can be vulnerable, and this allows for the experience of intimacy. And this is not just like sexual intimacy, right? This is emotional intimacy. This is spiritual intimacy, right? This is being able to let down our guard so we can come into deeper connections with the people around us. And I think that this also has a lot to do with the erotic. And again, not necessarily like in the sexual sphere, right? I think the erotic or eros is being able to fully experience life, right? To take in smells that activate our senses, to sit with the taste of foods that activate our senses. It is the real like connection with our sense reality. And this takes like time and this takes space and this takes the ability to be open to what we are receiving and not just like moving through at rapid pace, like scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, right? This is like being present with the sense experience. And I think that this like requires a sense of trust and vulnerability to be able to take the time to tune in to what we are experiencing in our lives. And so with Venus in Cancer, we are seeking to get to the beautiful, tender, buttery insides of the experience, right? Cancer is symbolized by the crab who has this hard outer shell that protects these vulnerable but delicious insides, right? And so Venus in Cancer is seeking to get beneath the shell, right? And into this buttery goodness, this vulnerable goodness of the crabby insides, right? And requires us to develop enough trust and safety to get through that exoskeleton that Cancer has developed in order to keep themselves safe. Right? And Cancer is a water sign, and water signs are seeking connection. Right? Water seeks the lowest point and is always looking to return back to the source, to that eternal ocean. Right? And the water signs want to flow together, right? Until it returns to the ocean. However, it may not feel safe enough to fully open up and allow that flow. So Venus in Cancer kind of stays on guard, right? Right? Stays in that shell while longing to create enough safety and trust to allow things to bypass the shell and come into the buttery goodness of the crab meat inside, right? And coming into deeper connection. And as Venus moves through Cancer, we are looking at the places where we can develop enough trust and safety that can facilitate that deeper level of intimacy, right? When I say intimacy, again, I'm not talking about necessarily sexual intimacy, but I'm talking about a level of vulnerability where we can be truly seen for who we are, right? And we can see somebody else and reflect that back to them. And where we can be really experienced by the other people in our lives, right? Intimacy, into me, you see, right? Being able to be like open enough. Yeah, thank you, Bear, right? Bear gets it, right? And we can consider what conditions we require to allow ourselves to be fully seen so that we can love more fully and show up more fully in our lives. And again, like this is not just about like romantic love, right? Cancer has a lot to do with family and close community, as well as our sense of home, our sense of place in the world. And, again, these familiar places and people and spaces help to provide that protective level that allows us to be open and vulnerable and to really be ourselves, right? Home and family and close friends can know us so well that they provide that container that allows us to be more fully ourselves. And this is the key with Venus and Cancer. And it's about developing a level of trust so that we can allow people to enter into our protective shell and see the person that we are below the exterior layer of protection, right? And I think about Cancer as like, being out in the world all day, right? You're running your errands, you're getting your coffee, you're doing your thing, you're getting your oil change, you're going to work, you're blah, 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 right? And we all have different masks that we put on in all of these different situations. And then we come back home, right? And we take off our shoes and take off our outdoor sweater and put on our indoor Mr. Rogers sweater, right? And put on some Harry Nielsen and maybe like put on like some comfy clothes or a costume. I don't know how you do it. Right? And then we're like, ah, right? And this is the opportunity where we get to like really be ourselves, right? We come home into the safety of our home environment and we can like dress like a freak, put the lime in the coconut, mix it all up, right? And like really be ourselves and unmask, right? And take off the armor that we wear in the world, take off the crab shell that we wear in the world, and we get to just be who we are, right? Who we are in that moment, independent of what other people are asking from us or need from us, right? We can watch some like trashy ass TV, like eat some sugary foods, whatever your thing is, right? But that feeling of like coming home and being like, oh, I can finally just be myself. I can finally just be. And that is, what I see at the heart of the Cancer archetype, right? Being in a shell that is safe enough to allow us to just be and just be who we are, right? And I think that part of Venus and Cancer is also about forming bonds that feel like protection, right? And that help us to create the space in ourselves and in our lives where we can truly be ourselves, where we can feel seen and appreciated for who we truly are without having to mask, right? Without having to contort ourselves or abandon our values to find that sense of connection. This is something that we're looking for with Venus's movement through Cancer is being able to just be who we truly are. Okay, Thursday, July the 31st. The Sun in Leo conjunct Mercury retrograde in Leo. This is going down at 9 degrees of that fixed fire sign of Leo. And so this is the Mercury Cazimi, the conjunction, right? The retrograde conjunction. So this is the center of Mercury's retrograde journey, which I believe ends August the 11th. So on Thursday, Mercury enters into the throne room of the sun and makes the offering of all the information that they have gathered, right? Their retrograde journey and their direct journey into their retrograde journey, right? All that information that we've been picking up, right, becomes offered into the eternal flame that burns bright in the heart of the sun. This is a moment of purification and rebirth, right? Mercury retrograde is a process of turning inward and gathering information, not from the external world, but from our internal environment. And it helps us to reconsider how we know what we know and the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going on. It gives us a chance to clean the filter of our past experience, which dictates how we perceive and experience the present moment. And it provides an opportunity to reconnect with ourselves and our inner knowing. Right? The Kazemi can provide a moment of clarity during this retrograde process, right? And so some things may click, right? This is Mercury's inferior conjunction with the sun, which means that during this conjunction, Mercury is between us and the sun, right? And so all of the information that the sun is shining down into our lives becomes filtered through Mercury, which is our cognitive and thinking processes, right? And so Mercury is translating or communicating the sun's rays to us during this conjunction. So during the meeting of the sun and Mercury is functioning as the intermediary or the filter for the sun, there's a chance to get some clarity around what the sun in Leo is trying to communicate to us mere earthlings, right? Leo is a sign where the sun makes its home, where it's in its power and its domicile. The sun here reminds us of our unique gifts and our individual ability to shine our light into the world, right? The sun in Leo wants to be seen and to share our gifts with the world around us and to really have those offerings be appreciated. So, with the Mercury retrograde here, we are reconsidering what we are being seen for and how we are being seen, and reconfiguring the ways that we express our authentic self, right? As Mercury meets up with the sun here, we can get some clarity around what feels most aligned with our inner light. And we might get some information about how we can best express that inner light into the world. We also might notice some information that helps us to tap into our unique gifts and abilities and the best way for us to share these gifts with those around us. I think the sign of Leo has a lot to do with courage, right? Leo rules the heart, right, and the chest. And the symbol of the lion is often seen as being related to courage. So, this is a moment where we might get some clarity around what courage looks like and how we can embrace bravery in our personal lives as well as in the external world. And so, an interesting kind of pop culture example of this that I saw recently is the latest episode of South Park. And I'm not a huge South Park fan, and it's really been years since I watched the show, but a number of people and basically the entire internet was like, you should probably watch this episode. And I was kind of impressed. Right. Not so much by the quality of the content, but the courage of the creators to step up and say some shit about the current political climate, right? Especially at a time when people in power in the news media and the private sector and the political arena, like people who hold a lot of cultural capital, who hold a lot of power, right, have offered very little resistance to the forces of authoritarianism and fascism that are kind of rising and eroding our democratic institutions and general quality of life. In this episode of South Park, which came right after Paramount caved to Trump and paid him $16 million to settle a lawsuit that he brought against 60 Minutes. And right after they settled that lawsuit, they can't Paramount canceled Stephen Colbert, right? And the network said that paying Trump had absolutely nothing to do with canceling Stephen Colbert, even though he was a really vocal critic of the Trump administration. And then a few days later, Paramount gave South Park $1.5 billion for 5 seasons. And the first episode they dropped called Paramount out for their cowardice and totally mocks Trump in like really like scathing ways, right? And like South Park, in my opinion, is like kind of lowbrow, but it seems like a pretty brave act, right? Which puts Paramount in a very difficult situation where they either allow it to keep going, right? Or they cancel the show and prove that they are actually in Trump's pocket, right? That they're actually cowards, you know? And this is just one thing that came to mind, right? But I think with the Mercury Cazimi, there is an opportunity to tune into this idea of bravery and what it means to have courage in our lives and in these like really trying and turbulent times. And perhaps this looks like having a hard conversation or just showing up with integrity. Maybe this looks like not abandoning our values when we're in challenging situations. Or it might look like speaking out against injustice, racism, genocide. It doesn't need to look any particular way, right? We all get to choose like what courage and being courageous looks like for ourselves, and we get to choose this each moment, right? And I think that courage is an internal quality that shines its way into the outside world by the way that we carry ourselves and through our actions, right? And these actions can be big or small, and they don't need to cause us to risk our safety or stability, but oftentimes they do require us leaning out of our comfort zone and returning to a deeper sense of alignment. And this is just one of the things that one might want to be open to this week, right? What does courage feel like to me, right? What does it feel like in my body? How do I know when I'm being asked to step into it, right? What does it look like in my life or in the world? What are examples of courage that I resonate with historically, currently? How do I practice being courageous? And the last thing that I'll say about this Kazemi moment is it brings the opportunity for some insight and some clarity. In all the confusion and the reconfiguring of the Mercury retrograde, this is a moment of illumination where some things may get revealed. But in order to receive that revelation, we need to quiet down and listen and be open to what's being shown or communicated to us. Today is a day to create some space so that inspiration and insight can arise. However, you know, you want to do however you want to do that is up to you. But you can try and allow a little bit more space in your life and practice listening a little deeper or opening your awareness just 10% more and just seeing what comes up or comes through for you. Okay, coming in, coming in hot towards the end. We got two more transits to talk about, and they're sort of connected to each other. On Friday, August the 1st, we have Venus in Cancer squaring Venus in Cancer square Saturn retrograde in Aries. This is occurring at 1 degree and 37 arc minutes of those cardinal signs, and then right after that, Venus will square Neptune in Aries like a couple minutes later. Okay, so a square is a hard aspect, right? And so this is a hard aspect between Saturn, the planet of limitations, consequences, and solitude, and Venus, the planet of love, relationship, and beauty, right? A square creates tension where two principles or archetypes are at cross purposes, and each one is trying to get their way. So, where Venus in Cancer wants to create trust, which facilitates deep and meaningful connection, like we talked about, right? Saturn in Aries wants solitude. It seeks to strengthen one's individual ego. Saturn has a pretty hard time trusting, right? Saturn holds a lot of fear and it seeks to protect us from experiencing pain. Saturn can hold on to old stories based in past wounds or feelings of rejection or abandonment, which they seek to prevent from ever happening again. And they try and really protect us from those things. However, Venus in Cancer seeks vulnerability, which can facilitate deep and meaningful connection, right? And so this can be really difficult because Venus in Cancer deeply wants to allow others to get under their shell so they can come into that space of intimacy and connection. But Saturn's like, oh, hell no, right? Absolutely not. Not safe, not going to happen. No fucking way, right? So with this square, there can be a sense that, no one can feel what I feel, right? Oh, I feel so much, but like no one gets me, right? And it can bring up that sort of ennui, right? And they can create a sense of isolation, even a sense of loneliness, right? This can cause us to withdraw or want to cut things out of a sense of disappointment or because other people are not living up to our expectations of what we want connection to look like or how we want to be seen or how we want to be felt or how we want to feel other people. Cancer protects itself with the crab shell and the crab claw snap, right? Right. Saturn, who deals with limitations and walls, can kind of reinforce the exterior shell, protecting our vulnerable insides from possible pain or disappointment, right? Venus in Cancer may also utilize the crab claw that either strikes and cuts things off, right, or grabs and holds tightly to things, and fixates on them and refuses to let them go. Either of these protective methods that Venus in Cancer might utilize can create feelings of loneliness and isolation. However, the benefit of this transit is that it asks us to take a step back and to consider how we are in connection with others, as well as how we are doing connection with ourselves. Right? Saturn is a planet of boundaries, and good boundaries make good relationships possible. While Venus in Cancer wants to go deep and engage in vulnerability and intimacy, Saturn helps us to consider the boundaries that might make these types of connection possible and sustainable. Saturn also provides a bit of a reality check. And this is pretty important with this transit because Venus is going to square Neptune, the planet of illusion and delusion, next, right? So Venus in Cancer can also get lost in the fantasy or the longing, right? And Saturn helps us to recognize what is actually happening and what is actually possible given the conditions that we are working within. From time to time, it can be really valuable to take a step outside and take a deep breath and get real high and scream at the top of our lungs, "What's going on?" Right? And just like check the situation for a moment, right? Saturn teaches us the gift of solitude, which is very different than loneliness, right? It is the art of being self-fulfilled and being able to be in connection with oneself and to be present without needing external stimulus or other people to take us away from ourselves or to provide us with a sense of meaning. This transit can be a little challenging because it may bring up some of these feelings of disconnection. But if we transmute these feelings into a sense of connection with ourselves, it can be incredibly helpful. Thank you for seeing that, Jesse Brown. It can also open the space to recognize what we are actually needing out of connection, right? Not being lost in the fantasy or like, oh, they'll save me, right? Being like, hold up, like, what am I actually looking for? What am I actually like able to provide? What does like real meaningful connection feel like to me? Not just like the fantasy. Right. And this information can help us to show up for our friendships and our relationships from a place of fullness instead of a place of lack. Right? Saturn's ability to help ground us into the current reality can be really beneficial because, again, right after this, Venus is going to square Neptune, the planet of fantasy, right? Which like maybe amplifies some of those romantic fantasies that Venus in Cancer is indulging, right? And the practical nature of Saturn can help us to not get lost in the fantasy or that cloying sense of nostalgia that Neptune brings to the function, right? But the it can help to keep us centered and grounded and like to recognize what boundaries actually allow us to have good and healthy connection, right? But the relationship or the tension between the fantasy and the reality can feel kind of destabilizing. So let's move along to Venus in Cancer squaring Neptune retrograde in Aries, which is occurring at 1 degree and 58 arc minutes. This is also happening Friday, August the 1st, shortly after Venus perfects their square to Saturn. So, whereas Saturn wants us to embrace reality, Neptune activates our imagination and can pull us out into fantasy. This may create unrealistic expectations around relationships and the ways that we interact with those that we are close to. We may find ourselves being pulled into daydreams or fantasy about connection or relationship. And the objects of our desire may not be capable or even interested in living up to the imagined role that we have invented for them to play in our internal romantic drama, right? However, the dream or the vision that Neptune offers can be really helpful for stimulating creativity. The romantic tension that Venus square Neptune and Saturn creates is kind of perfect fuel for a creative practice, right? Poetry, erotica, mannerist painting, dance, whatever you feel called to. right? Creative practice is a great way of moving the longing and desire and romantic yearning and the feeling of loneliness that this transit combo can kind of bring up, right? So somebody recently raised a point to me, or maybe I saw it in a meme. I don't know. It's like really hard to tell anymore. But basically, the point was this, right? That the world might be a better place if instead of podcasting, men should write more poetry, right? Lonely men should write more poetry. And maybe this is the cure for male loneliness, right? There is a long tradition of heartbroken and lonely men writing really beautiful poetry, which expresses their longing and their desire and inner vulnerability. Much different than podcasting, right? Podcasting may be creative practice, but like very different than like Keats or Byron. That's just my opinion, right? But like this transit is a great recipe for poetry. And I'm using poetry in a very loose and broad sense here, right? But the ability to translate the sense of longing and loneliness and desire and fantasy, right? This transit conjures in our imagination through some type of creative outlet can be incredibly powerful, right? And I'm not suggesting that this is a way of achieving financial success or pain or fame, right? There's not a lot of financial success in poetry. I think much less than podcasting, unfortunately. But, right, as an internal process to help us work through what's arising in our systems, right? These longings or these yearnings or these fantasies or these images, right? And being able to sort of write that out and set it in front of us and being able to look back on these feelings and inspirations that arose during this time can help us to better understand ourselves, right? And what we are seeking out of relationship and connection, as well as what we are seeking in our lives, right? As well as what we're capable of bringing to these relationships and the ways that we want to show up for them, right? With this transit as well, with the Saturn square, right? Venus squaring Neptune, Venus squaring Saturn, we may be experiencing or expecting a lot from other people in our lives, and others may be expecting a lot from us, right? And so recognize what is our capacity, right? And being able to communicate with others to understand what their capacities are can be really helpful in adjusting our expectations and not putting too much responsibility or pressure on other people, right? And this can be very valuable as we move through the weekend, right? Because everyone around you is also going through these transits, right? And people may be responding differently. Right. So it's important to practice good communication this weekend and not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by others' needs, right? And not asking too much from the people around us, and I said that asking for help was really important, and it is, right? And also like maintaining our grounded sense of reality that Saturn brings to the function and not having like unrealistic expectations based in an imaginal fantasy of like what we want our ideal like fantasy romance to look like, because that might not be fair to put on somebody else, right? With the Neptune Venus square, people may be operating more out of an ideal than a reality. And the more we can find the ways that that ideal and reality can work together, the better off we will be, right? Because both of these principles are important. And relationship is the arena where fantasy and reality meet this week and work it out with each other, right? And as one of my favorite astrologers, Carolyn Casey, always says, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train, right? And so we want to try and maintain a good balance between these two principles of fantasy and reality, or imagination and reality, so we can direct this train to the places where we want it to get to, so we're not going off the rails on a crazy train. And with that, my friends, I will bid you a fond farewell. Thank you so much for tuning in to This Week in Space. Again, I'm Joan Emerson Bell. I'm an astrologer, tarot reader, licensed mental health counselor in the land of enchantment. And um, Kendra Deluxe, I will touch on that in just a moment. Yeah, so if you're interested in an astrology reading or a tarot reading or a deeper conversation, I also do astrological based coaching. If you're interested in any of these offerings, you can find me at my website, Camp Wizard Camp. Send me a message over there or slide into my DMs and let me know what you're interested in, and we'll get some stuff on the books. I'm doing a lot of travel and I'll be in Greece for most of September, but there's time, there's always time. We will find a way. Also, if you're interested in joining me on this Dreaming Waters adventure in Epidavros, Greece, for the autumnal equinox, you can go to the dreammysteries.org and go to the retreats page. Again, I will put a link in the show notes on the YouTube, and there's also a link in my bio on the Instagram. If you have any questions, you can also DM me or email me. Yeah, astrology, tarot, blah, 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 blah. And again, if you like this, like, subscribe. I don't know, share it with your friends. It comes out as a YouTube, it comes out as a podcast. Spread the word. It's nice to get this to the people who might value it. Also, what else? I got a Patreon. Patreon is a great way to support this practice. I do this for free because I love it and I just like to share the wisdom. If you want to support me, you can go to the Patreon. It's under Camp Wizard Camp on Patreon. I got some great offerings there. Usually I do an astrology themed radio show. I've been taking a little break as I've been trying to have less work and more fun. But there's still some good offerings there. I do guided meditations for the new moon, tarot readings for the full moon, stuff like that. Or you could just donate because I don't know, if you want to, if you appreciate this, financial support always helps. But whatever happens, I'm gonna keep doing this because I love it, and I do it for the love of the game, not for the success or the money. So just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, that is all the astro weather that is fit to print, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next week. Same wizard time, same wizard channel. And until then, my friends, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.